At 6:47 a.m., the fog inside the Hürtgen Forest holds its ground. It clings to the fir trunks in slow drift, a pale layer suspended above the needles and wet soil. Visibility stays at 30 meters. Beyond that, everything dissolves into a gray field, where trees lose their edges. Private, first class. Eugene Vance lies under that gray, motionless, pressed into a depression he carved across 3 nights, using bare hands when the shovel rang too sharply against stone. Moss collected from fallen logs covers the rim. Ferns from the creek bed hide his shoulders. Bark stripped from a dead spruce breaks the line of his rifle. He knows the position is forbidden. Battalion doctrine marks anything beyond 200 meters as untenable for lone reconnaissance. He is 400 out, alone. No spotter, no wire, no planned withdrawal route, and yet he stays. Around him, the air carries pine resin and cold damp from the night's rainfall. The earth under his chest holds the chill. His Springfield M1903A4 rests on a patch of moss he keeps damp each morning, so no brittle strands snap beneath the stock. The rifle's metal stays warm under his palm, heat stored from long hours of contact. Through the scope, a farmhouse sits across a narrow logging road. Curtains drawn, no tracks in the mud, no livestock noise, nothing wrong at a glance, yet the stillness feels arranged, like a surface wiped clean. He has watched that window for 72 hours. Not once has the cloth shifted. Radio silence began at 4:12 a.m. Orders repeated twice. Return to friendly lines before dawn. He acknowledged, then continued to observe the road. Not defiance, just conclusion. He had charted the enemy's supply rhythm the same way others chart weather. Dawn convoys, light trucks, always a single motorcycle scout first. If the scout reported clear road ahead, engines followed in sequence. Fuel, ammunition, rations. Small columns, but steady. Reliable enough that the forest itself seemed to expect them. Vance studied the intervals, counted the rise and fall of German engines, logged the faint clatter in the distance when gears shifted on the grade. Each pass arrived within a span of minutes, and today the timing aligns again. A faint vibration rolls along the road. Not sound, just a tremor in the moss. Then a thin crackle, like metal brushing metal. He slows his breathing. Fog drifts in front of his muzzle. He waits. The farmhouse window shows no movement. Another pause. Branches settle. A bird crosses the road, low and fast, then disappears into the timber. Vance checks the minute hand on his watch. If the pattern holds, the scout should appear before 7 a.m. He readies the bolt without lifting the rifle. The motion is smooth, practiced. No click escapes the chamber. Somewhere upslope, a tree drips steadily onto a pile of wet needles. Each drop lands with a dull tap. The forest accepts the sound as part of its machinery. By now, the rules are already broken. His presence here tilts the logistics on both sides, yet no one sees him. No one will confirm the decision until later, when the convoy arrives or fails to. When headquarters asks why a lone rifleman stayed in a place meant to be empty. Fog thickens once more. The forest holds still. Vance watches the road, and he does not move. Would you have stayed? Eugene Vance came from Scranton, Pennsylvania, a place where coal dust settled on windowsills and machinery determined the rhythm of each day. His father repaired the equipment that kept the mines running. Eugene watched him rebuild engines on a bench behind their house, each part lined up in the order it left the machine. Nothing rushed, nothing wasted. The method left an impression. Before the war, Vance worked in a small watch repair shop near the rail yards. 10-hour days bent over open casings taught him the value of stillness. Mainsprings curled like thin coils of stored force. Escapements ticked at a pace that measured a worker's shift more reliably than any whistle. He learned that precision didn't come from speed, but from controlled pauses, from waiting until movement settled. By 6 a.m. most mornings, he was already at his desk, head bowed, magnifier raised. The shop stayed quiet except for the faint ticking of repaired watches in a small wooden tray. His hands developed a steadiness that the draft board later classified as unusually calm motor control. They noted how he held a pen without tremor, how he lifted a paper clip as if aligning it to a scale. It wasn't natural talent, just years of controlled motions practiced at close range. He never hunted, never owned a rifle. He understood systems, not sport. Worn bushings told him where tension accumulated. Scratched gear teeth revealed where force traveled under strain. Patience uncovered what haste disguised. When the Army called him for evaluation, he entered without assumptions about combat. He simply watched the process the way he once watched customers wait while he sized their watches. At Fort Benning, instructors saw the stillness immediately. Vance stood on the rifle range without flinching. The recoil didn't startle him. It only marked a timed event, a predictable transfer of energy, traveling through the stock, shoulder, and breath. He adjusted without comment. He cleaned his rifle the same way he cleaned watch movements, methodical strokes, metal exposed to light until each surface reflected evenly. Other snipers in his platoon came from hunting country. They carried stories of deer trails, frost on early rifles, and long marches over ridgelines. Vance listened but stayed quiet. His thinking followed different lines. Not predator and prey, not chase and strike. Instead, he mapped observation windows, time delays, probability paths. He filled a small notebook with pencil marks, distances measured by stride, wind angles tracked by the sway of roadside grass, the number of seconds between a branch shifting and the air reaching his cheek. Nothing dramatic, just entries stacked like the teeth of a gear, each one turning the next. The notebook never left his pocket, not once during field exercises. When asked about it, he explained that every system showed its pattern if watched long enough. It was the closest he came to philosophy, a reminder that war, like a watch, depended on components working in sequence. 2 or 3 instructors agreed, quietly, without writing it down. In those days, such thinking was considered a side detail, not doctrine. In the barracks, soldiers compared their confirmed kills. Vance answered with confirmed or unconfirmed, in the same tone he once used to describe a watch running fast or slow. Not indifference, just classification. The war had not hardened him. It had simply given his patience a purpose. He carried that purpose forward, step by step, toward the forest where waiting became its own kind of weapon, and where stillness decided more than movement ever could. In September 1944, the Hürtgen Forest is less a battlefield than a pressure point. Dense timber closes around a network of narrow dirt roads. Each road carries the weight of German supply traffic moving toward the Rhine. Tanks cannot push through the undergrowth. Trucks cannot divert around fallen trees or soft soil. The forest turns movement into a fixed pattern. American intelligence marks 3 main corridors. The road beneath Vance's position feeds ammunition and rations to 2 Wehrmacht battalions, holding the Siegfried Line 6 kilometers east. Their pillboxes depend on steady shipments. Without them, artillery crews restrict fire. Infantry stretches rations 1 day longer. Medics ration bandages. It is not a dramatic collapse, just a slow tightening. Fog keeps the road quiet at first light. It pools in low sections where ruts hold last night's rain. Tire tracks from earlier convoys form a set of grooves, packed hard by weeks of repeated use. Nothing about the road looks significant. Yet everything passing over it supports the German defense grid. One stalled truck forces another to wait. One missing shipment alters a company's schedule by half a day. In a mechanized war, delay is damage. The American plan in Hürtgen relies on attrition, not breakthrough. Make every mile expensive. Make every movement uncertain. Each road becomes a calculation for the German quartermasters. Risk the route or save the cargo for nightfall. A single disrupted convoy does not decide the line, but it forces decisions downstream, and the system reacts. U.S. commanders know their own limits. Fighter-bombers cannot patrol tree-covered roads. They need open ground, clear targets, fuel reserves for the flight home. Artillery teams cannot waste shells, guessing at traffic they cannot see. The forest hides everything under a ceiling of branches. That leaves smaller assets. Snipers, scouts, observation teams, positioned where visibility narrows but still exists. These teams normally operate in pairs. They rotate on schedules. They follow defined fields of fire and maintain communications with Battalion S2. Each report passes through channels. Each engagement requires confirmation. The system expects consistency, predictability. The logic behind integrated operations is simple. Information only matters when linked to the larger plan. What Vance is doing falls outside that structure. Solos interdiction, deep placement, no communications, no extraction route. His location has already been flagged in a battalion note as unsupported irregular. In a file cabinet somewhere behind the lines, his name sits beside a mark indicating deviation from standard procedure. And yet, the arithmetic stands. 1 man, 1 rifle, and 6 hours of disruption can delay supplies intended for 2,000 enemy soldiers. A gust crosses the corridor. Leaves scatter across the hard-packed mud. The road remains empty, but the importance of its vacancy is clear. If a convoy hesitates, if a supply officer reroutes to avoid suspected threat, the system shifts. Tension passes along the chain, the same way force travels through linked gears. Logistics is not dramatic. It is repetition. It is trucks, timetables, and fuel allocations moving in a constant loop. Break the loop at a single point, and the rhythm falters. Industrial doctrine calls this the pressure effect, not destruction, but delay. Vance waits in that delay. A still figure in a narrow gap where the machinery of 2 armies crosses paths, quiet impact measured in hours. From the first night, Vance sensed the forest was off pattern. Dawn came without the usual bird calls. No wing beats cutting through the upper branches. No brief chatter before light settled across the ground. The silence wasn't total, just selective, as if something had moved the smaller animals away from their routines. A badger trail, he marked with a bent twig, had been flattened by morning. Not trampled, smoothed, the kind of surface left when a boot drags lightly to remove sign. He noted it without reaction, just another entry in the steady accumulation of small irregularities. By midday on the second day, new boot prints appeared 30 meters south of his position. Single file, even spacing, pressed with enough consistency to show training. Not American. The prints were shallow, weight distribution balanced, suggesting light loads. Reconnaissance troops, not supply units. They had moved west, which meant they were scanning the corridor, not passing through it. The next afternoon, at 1:20 p.m., an engine idled somewhere beyond the tree line. Low, steady, then cut off abruptly. No follow-up movement. No crunch of gears. Just the quiet settling of branches after vibration. Vance listened for any return of mechanical noise. Nothing arrived. An hour later, thin smoke drifted across the canopy from the north-northeast. Not wood smoke. The scent carried a sharpness consistent with signal canisters. The plume dissipated before reaching treetop height. Vance wrote in his notebook, 1320s. Smoke, NNE, no source. No additional comment. Observation only. That evening, a German patrol passed within 50 meters. Slow steps, controlled halts. Their formation didn't sweep the ground or search outward. They listened. Each pause lasted long enough for wind to shift between the trees. One soldier knelt. He studied the soil for 2 full minutes, leaning forward as if reading the ground by proximity. Vance kept his breathing shallow. His ghillie suit, built from local moss and clipped foliage, blended him into the depression. Stillness mattered more than camouflage. The patrol moved on with no signal. When their steps faded, Vance remained unmoving for another hour. His legs went numb. Blood pooled behind one knee, leaving a sharp pressure that pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. He accepted the discomfort without adjustment. By nightfall, distant small arms fire echoed from the American lines. 3 short bursts, evenly spaced. Then silence. Not a firefight, a test. A probing action from a German patrol, or an American reaction to motion in the undergrowth. Either way, another sign that routines along the forest edge were shifting. The pattern became clear. German units were adjusting. They knew Allied marksmen operated in this sector. They changed their own schedules. They ran decoy patrols and altered their standard routes. The silence where birds should have been, the erased trail, the smoke, the listening patrol. Each anomaly represented a minor correction in a larger system, responding to new pressure. Vance lay in the moss and matched these changes against his observations. The convoy he expected had a rhythm shaped by weeks of routine. But routines break under stress, and stress had arrived. If the convoy did not come tomorrow, it would not come at all. The forest had begun to tighten around his position, reshaping itself in response to unseen factors. His window, once measured in hours, had narrowed to a single dawn cycle. He remained in place, aware that even stillness carried risk when the system was shifting. At 11:15 p.m. on September 13th, the forest carried a thin, uneven wind. It moved through dark branches without pattern, bending them just enough for Vance to hear the soft tread of boots before he saw the runner. The man appeared at the edge of the fallback hide, 200 meters closer to American lines, breathing hard, rifle slung, sweat showing as a faint sheen even in the low light. His message was short, delivered in a steady whisper. Captain Ridley ordered Vance back to the company perimeter by 6:00 a.m. No written note, no explanation beyond the tone that said the entire line was beginning to shift. Vance acknowledged. He gave the single nod expected in the dark, a small gesture that carried the weight of hierarchy. Then, with the runner gone, he turned away from the safer route and moved back toward the primary position he had carved out over 3 long nights. Moss, packed earth, branches trimmed by hand, everything placed to break outlines and silence the smallest movement. It was work, shaped by patience, not creativity. Each layer built for function. The order itself was not unreasonable. Battalion was reconfiguring the left flank. Forward observers and sniper teams were being pulled in to tighten fire corridors before the next push toward the ridgeline. A call like that fit the rhythm of a unit preparing for movement. In the system of war, the group advanced together. Outliers were folded back into the pattern, but Vance carried information the captain did not. He had tracked the convoy cycle for 3 days, intervals, axle counts, engine pitch. German logistics in this wooded sector followed a rigid loop, not by choice, but because the road network offered no meaningful detours. The supply vehicles moved like a machine with one setting: predictable, repetitive, vulnerable. If he left now, the line of observation he had established, minute by minute, sound by sound, would vanish. A new man would need days to understand what he already knew by feel. A brief stillness settled over the pit. Only distant leaf chatter marked the time passing. Vance sat with the order, weighing it not as rebellion, but as calculation. The mission required one accurate moment. The command structure required presence at perimeter by dawn. The two needs were not aligned, and the system was not built for nuance. Forward lines often depended on the clockwork of convoys more than the ambitions of officers. One of those quiet, industrial truths of the war. He stayed. By 11:40 p.m., he laid out his cleaning kit and worked through the rifle in slow, controlled motions. A light film of grit lifted from the bolt face. The barrel was dry, smooth, ready for a cold morning shot. He checked his ammunition. 20 rounds on hand. Enough for a precise engagement, not a skirmish. Each cartridge reflected a thin line of moonlight, a reminder of the scarcity that shaped frontline decisions. A faint shift in the air followed. The scent of damp soil thickened. Fog would roll in by first light. He had learned its timing through small signs, temperature drop, dew pattern, the muted cadence of the forest. And with fog came the convoy. Engines would idle low to avoid alerting American positions. Tires would leave shallow impressions in the soft roadbed. Drivers would stay on schedule because schedules were the only certainty left to them. By 12:10 a.m., the woods returned to full quiet. No distant bursts from the lines. No patrol movement. Only the weight of waiting. Vance settled deeper into the earth, hands steady, eyes open to the thin strip of road he could barely see through the branches. He had made his choice, not defiance, just alignment with the facts he had gathered. The war ran on orders, but this moment ran on observation. He waited for dawn, knowing the next hours would decide whether the risk had meaning. And so, the question lingers. In that silence, with only your judgment to guide you, would you have stayed in the pit? September 14, 1944. 7:03 a.m. The morning fog hangs low across the forest floor, thick enough to dull the outlines of branches, yet thin enough for sound to carry cleanly. Vance studies the road through his narrow lane of visibility, the chill settling into the fabric of his ghillie suit. Dew clings to the moss beneath his elbows. Every detail is still, waiting. A faint, uneven buzz reaches him first, mechanical, light, steady. It grows, then fades, then grows again as the sound bends through the trees. Moments later, a motorcycle emerges, exactly on the schedule, Vance calculated. A single scout in gray-green uniform rides at patrol speed, chin lifted slightly as he scans the dark timber ahead. The machine idles low as it passes his sector, its engine giving a small, irregular cough. Vance does not fire. He marks the time. He counts the seconds until the scout vanishes into the fog. 4 quiet minutes follow. No voices, no clatter of equipment. Only the slow drip of condensation from overhead branches. Then the first truck appears. Canvas-covered, front grille wet with mist, tires cutting shallow lines in the damp roadbed. The driver leans forward, both hands on the wheel. The engine runs in a controlled rhythm, neither rushed nor hesitant. Behind it comes a second truck, then a third, then a fourth, all spaced at consistent intervals, 50 meters, give or take, a single stride. Through small tears in the canvas, the shapes inside become visible. Wooden crates, metal ammunition tins, fuel cans strapped upright. The basic components of war. Each vehicle adds weight to the larger system, the logistics chain that keeps divisions alive. There is no infantry escort. That tells Vance everything. Confidence, routine, expectation of safety. His breathing slows until it matches the settled cadence of the road. At 7:09 a.m., his first shot breaks the stillness. The round strikes the lead truck's front tire. A flat crack of impact. Rubber collapses. The vehicle jolts, skids a short distance, and stops at an angle across the road. Before the driver can register the failure, Vance sends a second round through the windshield. Glass fragments drift outward. The man slumps against the door. The convoy shudders to a halt. Rear trucks stop abruptly, engines rumbling in place. Soldiers jump down, boots hitting the ground with heavy, uncertain landings. They call to each other, searching for direction, but no clear origin of the threat presents itself. Vance fires again, one shot every 12 seconds, each measured with the same precision he once used adjusting the fine springs inside a watch case. No haste, no shift in rhythm. He aims for center mass, nothing theatrical, just certainty. The moss beneath his rifle absorbs the recoil. Damp roots and soft earth hold him steady. The vegetation around his pit disperses the muzzle blast, bending the sound outwards so the Germans aim 200 meters north, assuming the fire comes from higher terrain. Their return shots tear bark from trees and scatter needles across the forest floor, but none land close. 7th shot, 9th, 12th. By 7:22 a.m., the firing stops. Not because his ammunition is spent, but because no targets remain moving. The final echoes settle into the fog. A light hiss rises from the lead truck's ruptured radiator, sending thin steam into the cold air, mixing with the morning mist until it becomes indistinguishable. Vance waits. 30 minutes, no reinforcements, no distant engines. The road stays empty. When he finally shifts his weight, the forest accepts the motion, like it had expected it. He withdraws west, low and quiet, leaving the convoy behind as a silent mark of halted machinery. The war will record the wrecks, not the man who made the calculation. At 8:40 a.m., the fog along the forest road has thinned into loose strands. A German recovery team approaches the stalled convoy from the east, engines running at a restrained pace. They slow as the wreckage comes into view. 4 trucks angled across the road, steam still lifting from the lead vehicle's ruptured radiator. 21 bodies lie where they fell. No drag marks, no footprints that suggest direction. Only the still air and the smell of burnt rubber. The team spreads out. They search for shell fragments, grenade pins, cartridge casings. They find none. The report they draft lists multiple firing positions and likely squad-sized ambush. Numbers fill gaps that observation cannot. In the machinery of war, uncertainty is replaced with estimation. By 12 Sal p.m., German command in the sector issues new protocols. All convoys will now require infantry escort. That means fewer crates loaded per truck. Fewer fuel cans strapped to the rear. Cargo capacity reduced by 30%. Delivery windows pushed back by 6 to 8 hours. A small change, one convoy, one road, but the system absorbs it like grit in a gear. Friction spreads. Elsewhere, an American forward observer sits beside a wet stump, headphones pressed against his ears. At 2:15 p.m., he intercepts a short German transmission. Route Berke, closed pending security assessment, rerouting through Oberau. He writes it into his log with the same blocked letters he uses for every entry. The reroute adds 14 kilometers to the supply run, pushing deliveries past nightfall. It forces trucks onto narrower roads already registered as high risk by American artillery. But the observer doesn't know why the Germans changed course. He doesn't connect it to a sniper he's never heard of. The day moves on with quiet inevitability. At 4:50 p.m., 6 kilometers east, a Wehrmacht artillery battery sends out a routine status message. Ammunition shortages. Their resupply convoy, the same one rerouted through Oberau, experienced engine trouble on the climb, lost time, and is now 12 hours behind schedule. The battery reduces its fire missions. Shells must be conserved until morning. American infantry advancing toward their position. Later note the lighter than expected resistance. A squad crosses a clearing where artillery would normally bracket the approach. 3 men who would have fallen to shrapnel instead move forward unscathed. They don't pause to consider why the fire didn't come. They chalk it up to timing, luck, or weather. The battlefield rarely announces the reason behind its missing hazards. By 6:30 p.m., Vance reaches the American perimeter. Mud on his uniform, moss clinging to his sleeves. He walks with the stiffness of someone who has been lying still for too many hours. A lieutenant meets him at the line and asks where he has been. Vance answers with 2 steady words. Observation post. The lieutenant studies him for a moment, then nods and waves him through. No reprimand, no interest. Just another man returning from the tree line. That night, radio intelligence circulates through command tents. German logistics, in the Hürtgen sector, are experiencing systemic coordination failures. Routes delayed. Deliveries inconsistent. No one mentions a lone rifleman in a forest pit. The destroyed convoy becomes another line in a report, absorbed into the larger flow of attrition. The war moves on. The system resets its rhythm, and Vance remains a name without a footnote. By late afternoon on September 16th, the air around the forward command post hangs with the mix of damp soil and slow-burning cigarettes. A canvas flap moves in the breeze, letting in a thin line of light across a dugout reinforced with timber and corrugated steel. The hum of generators carries through the earth overhead, steady and low, like the pulse of a machine that cannot stop. Vance steps inside when called. Boots leave faint prints in the packed mud. Captain Ridley stands beside a folding table, arms folded, eyes fixed on a sector map, weighted by grease-penciled notes and a tin mug half filled with cold coffee. He doesn't invite Vance to sit. He doesn't sit himself. "You were ordered back," Ridley says. His voice is flat, the kind that leaves no room for misunderstanding. Vance answers with a single nod. "Yes, sir." Ridley waits. Silence fills the dugout, broken only by the soft ticking of a field clock and the distant rumble of trucks shifting somewhere along the American line. Vance offers nothing. No defense, no details. Ridley leans over the table and taps a marked route, his finger landing on a thin line labeled Burke. Radio intercepts say Route Burke is closed. 21 German KIA, 4 trucks destroyed. Supply movement disrupted across the sector. He looks up. "That's your work?" Vance hesitates, just long enough for the question to settle. "Yes, sir." Ridley exhales through his nose, slow and measured. He picks up a pencil and taps it against the map, a rhythm without impatience, more like the quiet tolling of an internal ledger. The air feels heavier for a moment. Pause. "I should court-martial you," Ridley says. "You ignored a direct order, ran an operation alone. No spotter, no comms, no extraction plan. If you'd been captured, you'd have opened this whole sector to counterintelligence." Vance remains still. The mud drying on his sleeves cracks slightly as he shifts his weight. Outside, footsteps sweep past the entryway, soldiers moving with the blunt focus of men who have too much to do and too little time. Ridley continues, but the tone lowers, losing its edge. But you also shut down a supply corridor. We've been trying to interdict for 2 weeks. Battalions pleased. Divisions pleased. He taps the pencil again. They're calling it a textbook disruption. The pencil stops. Except it wasn't textbook. It was unauthorized, reckless, and unrepeatable. A faint vibration runs through the table as a truck starts somewhere behind the ridge. Fuel lines, axles, and timetables, the machinery of the front adjusting without pause. Ridley's eyes track Vance again. "Understood, sir," Vance says. Ridley nods once. "You're not getting a medal. You're getting a reprimand in your file and a warning. Follow orders, or you're done." Vance salutes. The gesture is clean, unembellished. He turns to leave. The flap rustles again. "For what it's worth. Good work," Ridley says. Vance doesn't respond. He steps back into the open air, where engines drone, shovels bite into earth, and supply teams move crates, with the practiced rhythm of a system that never stops for individual stories. No ceremony waits for him, no entry in the official summaries. Just the quiet understanding that a moss-lined pit, a handful of choices, and 20 rounds of ammunition bent the day's ledger of losses and delays. By nightfall, his footprint vanishes into the churned mud outside the dugout, absorbed, like everything else, into the machinery that decides the pace of war. The record holds only the numbers. The man is left behind. Would you have stepped forward when ordered to step back? Eugene Vance survived the Hürtgen Forest and the long winter that followed. When the war ended, he stepped off a troop train in Pennsylvania and walked back into the steady rhythm of Scranton. The streets were familiar. Coal dust on windowsills, factory whistles cutting the morning air, storefront glass fogged from the heat inside. He unlocked the watch repair shop, where he had apprenticed before enlistment. The tools were where he had left them. Brass gears, tiny screws sorted in trays, a bench lamp that gave off a thin hum when switched on. He worked there for decades. Customers remembered his quiet manner and the way he listened before touching a timepiece. They never heard stories from Europe. They never learned about the forest or the pit, or the hours he spent in the mud, marking the movements of a convoy. He treated the war the same way he treated a damaged watch, a system with moving parts, each one acting on another, best understood through stillness. His service record remained plain. Marksman. Adequate proficiency. No references to the German supply column that stopped on a fog-bound road. No notation of the 21 bodies recovered by the enemy. No acknowledgement of the moment when a single rifle and a narrow field of fire altered the timetable of an entire sector. The war produced thousands of such omissions. The system recorded only what its forms allowed. Across the Atlantic, the forest reclaimed the ground he had used. Rain filled the depressions left by shell bursts. Moss grew over splintered logs. By the following spring, the shallow pit he had shaped blended into the slope, its outlines softened by leaves and runoff. It was never surveyed, never catalogued. It existed for 72 hours, then dissolved back into the soil. But the effects radiated long after the terrain healed. A delayed convoy reduced the ammunition count of an artillery battery. A battery short on shells produced fewer fire missions. Reduced fire meant lighter resistance along a narrow axis of advance. 3 American soldiers, advancing under the cover of those missing volleys, survived the day. Their files list them as present for duty. Nothing more. The chain is simple when traced backward, though almost no one ever does. Logistics define the battlefield. The clockwork of convoys determines who eats, who shoots, who moves, and who stalls. In industrial war, most outcomes begin far from the men who feel them. A single pause in one sector becomes a shortage in another. A shortage becomes a gap. A gap becomes a foothold. The mechanism turns again and again, each small disruption adding weight to the cumulative ledger. Vance understood that logic. He had seen it in watches. One bent tooth, one fraction of damage, and the entire device drifted off its intended rhythm. 2 minutes lost each day. 10 by the end of the week. A failure too small to notice until it was too late. The soldiers who survived because of him never knew. The officers who wrote reports on systemic disruption never associated their data with one man who had walked alone into the fog. The system absorbed his actions the way it absorbed thousands, quietly, efficiently, without sentiment. By the time Vance grew old, even he spoke of the war only in fragments. A cold morning, a stiff rifle bolt, the sound of trucks laboring uphill, nothing more. The rest remained unspoken, left to settle like dust on the gears he cleaned each night. The forest has long since closed over the road where he waited. The moss stands thicker now. The road is barely visible. But somewhere in the vast architecture of history, a line of cause and effect remains. Patient, precise, invisible. Would you have stayed in that pit, knowing no one would ever speak your name? If this story moved something in you, if you recognized the weight of invisible decisions, then don't let it dissolve back into the forest. Share it. Let others see what patience looks like when measured in moss and mathematics. Let them ask the same question. Vance answered alone in the dark. Subscribe to this channel for more untold stories. From the wars, no textbook fully explains. These are the mechanics of history, the logistics of survival, the quiet calculations that decided everything. Hit that notification bell, because the next story is already waiting in the fog, and it deserves to be heard.